uh, let's go straight into the keynote address. And let me read Greg Clark's bio that we have here, because it's worthwhile that I do read that. Greg is an advisor, advocate, and mentor for cities and businesses. He has trained as an economist, social and political scientist, and is a city and regional planner from Cambridge University, Columbia University, and the London School of Economics. He is currently a Global Fellow in the Metropolitan Program and Global Cities Initiative at the Brookings Institute. He's a Senior Fellow of the Urban Land Institute of Europe. He's a Chairman, OECD Lead Forum on Local Development and Investment Strategies, Co-Chairman and International Advisory Committee on the New York Regional Plan. He's a member of the Advisory Board of the Oxford Future of Cities program, and that's just a selective list. I didn't read the entire bio because he would not have liked me to do so. But he is an exceptional person, and we are very happy to have him as the keynote speaker. Great.
Morning, Mr. Secretaries. Good morning, all the dignified members of the panel. Good morning to everyone here. It's a great honor for me and a real pleasure to be here in Delhi today, and I'd like to thank the World Bank and the Government of India for the invitation to be here. I had the pleasure of spending most of last week in Mumbai, so I was ready for a trip to Delhi, and of course I did witness this wonderful smart transport system that does mean that the police do indeed change lanes, the direction of lanes of certain roads, as you're driving along them early in the morning. I also saw, of course, this morning coming here from the airport, people actually switching vehicles in the middle of the road, which I thought was also quite a smart solution. So that was very good as well. I'm going to say quite a few things today about smart cities and India, but I'd like to stress that this perspective is an outside-in perspective. I'm not an advisor to the Indian government. I'm not an advisor to the World Bank in India. I'm trying to think about the question of how does India and smart cities come together as someone who spends his time in about 100 other cities around the world during the course of any one year. And I want to begin with a very friendly warning, if I may. Those of us who are active in the field of cities and urban policies know that it's an area where, let's just put it this way, science has not yet quite developed. And the result is that every year or 2 years or 5 years, new concepts are introduced. I remember very well the beginnings of the entrepreneurial cities movement in the 1970s and 1980s. And I remember when sustainable cities was the buzzword. I remember also, of course, when global cities became the great new idea of urban policy. And of course, smart cities, which is the phrase we're talking about today, has already been superseded by conversations about future cities, resilient cities, and flexible cities. So if there's one message I have today, it's we must be very ecumenical and not very doctrinal when it comes to thinking about what we're trying to achieve, which is what, of course, all the secretaries have already been saying. Now, I completed a report for the British government just recently that looked using the famous research technique, now called Google Scholar, at the use of different words to describe different kinds of cities and their environmental performance. And as you can see, sustainable cities came top, smart cities second, future cities third. So if any of you are the kinds of people who like to tattoo on your arms the things you believe in, you did very well if you backed those in the last 5 years. But if you backed digital cities, walkable cities, or eco-cities, you're going back to the tattoo shop to have the tattoo removed, if you look at what's happened here. So the point is really this. Let's remember that it's very important for India to build its own proposition about smart cities, not to borrow anyone else's, and of course with all respect to all of the large corporates in the room who have a smart cities proposition, remember that India's proposition is more important than yours. You will see, as you go through all sorts of concepts of what is a smart city, multiple ideas about it. This one has 8 key propositions. This one has 5 with 13 subheadings. This one has 4. This one has 10. So the idea that somebody knows out there what is a smart city and we must simply work out the formula and then apply it, is not the right approach, and indeed it's not the approach the Indian government is taking, as I think you can hear. What is, I think, important is to recognize that behind this movement there are some very big trends. One part of the backdrop to this is a changing relationship between business and the tools of business management and cities and the tools of city management. Over the last 10 years in general, and the last 6 years in particular, there's growing evidence of 6 rather important trends. The first one, of course, is that cities have become, because of population trends, huge emerging markets for businesses. So the idea that businesses can penetrate urban markets, service them different, service them better, is a great driver of innovation. And you will hear much more about that, I'm sure, in the course of the day, and more from me shortly. At the same time, there's a huge amount of evidence to show that businesses are re-urbanizing. The 20th century model of suburban campuses and off-site locations for businesses is really changing. Businesses are re-urbanizing just as populations, of course, are urbanizing and metropolitanizing. Because of the growth of cities worldwide, a phenomenon you've already heard about, we see the rise of what I would call tradable urban services. Waste management systems, energy systems, telecommunication systems, transport management systems, architecture, urban design, major urban engineering. These areas of an urban economy have ceased to be simply part of the infrastructure and internal service system, and instead have become the new frontier of trading urban economies. So even though we know that finance and business services, creative industries, media, digital content, and the science and technology related industries are internationally tradable, this is the fastest growing tradable urban services. And you see cities, of course, like Seoul in Korea, that's well represented here, like Singapore, like Barcelona, like Curitiba, like Medellin, becoming the global centers of these new tradable urban services. Businesses are rebranding to participate much more in urban markets. We'll see that in a minute. And of course, cities are becoming hubs of innovation. As this interaction between business processes and urbanization deepens, then cities themselves become ecosystems for products for businesses, and especially cities that have complexity and scale and diversity within them, where you can test products for multiple markets in one location. At the same time, therefore, businesses are restructuring to meet city goals, and in particular, appointing account management systems and business strategies to engage with cities. The reason I spell all of this out is because much of the noise that's in the atmosphere about smart cities is generated through these 6 key trends. And so understanding these trends as part of the backdrop is important to differentiate between what is a meaningful smart cities program for India, let's say, lack of a really effective institutional response at the metropolitan level. Land management severely constraining the carrying capacity of cities in India. Absolutely right. Too much reliance on land as a mechanism for generating investment capital, a fiscal system that perhaps incentivizes the wrong things. Lack of coordination of land policy with infrastructure because it's very difficult to do. And then the World Bank has made 3 proposals, which probably most people in the room are familiar with, but investing in institutional and information platforms, rationalizing the rules of the game for delivery of infrastructure, investing in better transport between metropolitan cores and peripheries. Obviously, very strong and important dimensions of what is needed. And there's much to build upon. Good things have been happening in India for some time. And if we look at the major cities of India, we see, I think, a clear agenda emerging around governance, fiscal systems, planning, affordable housing, sprawl and congestion, inclusiveness, not just through services, but also through economic opportunity, which has been described. In the medium-sized cities, we see the need for the governance and connectivity, but also this focus on developing specialization, transport corridor links, important standards of education that link to aspiration, key public services, picking the right projects to invest in. And then we've already talked a little bit about small cities in India, but quality of life needs, infrastructure, the need for state subsidies, and the need to move away from that and become more self-financing, the technical capacity and transparency. Now, I mention all of this only to show that I think India knows what are the challenges for its cities. These lines come from reports that are from within the country. They're not reports that I've written. I think what it shows us is that there are some different needs in different parts of the Indian system of cities. If we look at what's happening in China over the recent period and their urban policies, you see as the second tier and third tier of cities in China has grown, I think a new set of policies with their 2014 to 2020 urbanization plan, with state-led transport and infrastructure construction, a new growth model with domestic services and consumption fueling the growth much more. Every city with 200 residents being well connected into the national rail and motorway system. The issue of unregistered migrants, the hukou, and the need to really help them and the integration of them now into urban life. And then local governments being given much more scope to issue longer-term financing techniques. And then if we look at urban policy in Brazil at the moment, this has already been mentioned briefly, what we see is a big debate happening in the federal government in Brazil around fiscal and financial reforms for major cities, enabling them again to take much longer term investment decisions, reducing their debt burden, increasing their fiscal capacity, increasing their access to financial instruments, plus a major move to deliver recognition of the metropolitan areas, which often contain within them 20, 30, 40, 50 municipalities, and giving those metropolitan areas a clear institutional platform for leadership and management. That, coupled with a massive investment in housing, a growth program which combines infrastructure and housing investment in one big initiative, and then a very strong initiative around urban mobility, reducing the time taken to the 30 minutes that was described earlier to travel within particular cities. Now, in other countries, smart city policies are being combined with these kinds of urbanization policies, which are about structuring the experience of urbanization and shaping it better. I don't need to list all of these for you, but it's very clear, I think, that in Japan, the Tokyo and the Osaka metropolitan governments have built a strong metropolitan institution, and that's provided the platform for them to be smarter. In London, where I live, the creation of a strong, coordinating, mayoral, metropolitan government has been the trigger to building the Smart London platform, which now enables London to become a smart city. So there is a link between these kinds of governance and institutional investment reforms and taking on a smart city program. So my last slide simply asks this question. This is a brainstorm. Does India need smart cities? Well, of course, the answer is yes, and the secretaries have given already a brilliant set of expositions as to why smart cities is a good idea. Smart cities can bring transparency, efficiency, resilience, modernization to many cities in India, and they will do that. Smart cities, to my mind, is a means to achieve some very important goals, not least goals that embolden, empower, and incentivize citizens to really feel a sense of connection with their cities. But I don't think smart cities on their own can be a total solution. Indian cities, it seems to me, also need some of the things that Brazilian cities and Chinese cities are starting to benefit from. metropolitan leadership, governance and coordination, stronger land use planning and urban management tools, infrastructure investment mechanisms that are long-term and can be executed, the implementation capacity to deliver things at scale, especially in complex environments, and then an alignment of strategic planning at national, state, and city level. Now, I would expect Indian smart cities to emerge as a world-leading practice in terms of how technology and economic development considerations, two areas where India has global leadership, how those two things can be integrated into a broader and more comprehensive urban and metropolitan program. And if that happens, I think that India will show very well that IT itself is not the solution, it's an enabler. And if it's brought together with an alignment of good leadership, governance, investment institutions, and most importantly, time, if it's pursued consistently for 10, 15, or 20 years, I think the Smart City Initiative will prove to have been the catalyst for developing a comprehensive and world-leading urban policy for India. Thank you very much indeed.